I think we could start with kind of maybe let's call them simple questions, and then it would be the first part, and we'll see where it would lead, and then there will be a second part when you could also join and elaborate these themes in a more specific way, not to have not to be too limited by the kind of
Do you have any direction in your mind?
yeah, I have. Like if we would detach from theme too far,
Okay. You can, I mean,
I will return.
let's surf.
Yeah, let's start with the question: what is utopia,
Oh.
as you understand it now, and what do you think of it? What do you think, like, of this, of the whole world we can start to imagine if we think of utopia, like now, in this current time we are experiencing? And do you think it's something like a concept which has failed already, or it still has a relation of future as it was
Okay.
before?
That bildiğim yerden geldi. That's a question from somewhere where I have already quite a lot, I mean, established idea. So, okay. So are you going to ask? Are we already recording?
We're already recording, so you could.
Oh, okay. So, utopia. First of all, for me, it really does not mean something surrealistic and therefore dismissible. No, I find utopia particularly useful and much more meaningful and functional than any recipe or doctrine, because it shows you a direction. I find it really somewhat awkward that people try to plan things and give recipes and show methodologies and even procedures and targets, predicted and ready-made design targets, and then together with these procedures how to reach it. Instead, utopia gives you criteria and principles which you can interpret anytime, and it shows you a direction. And therefore, with a utopia, there is not this situation where you are supposedly already at the target, at least as far as it was predicted before, and then you sit in the midst of a meaninglessness and don't know how to continue, or also a loss of enthusiasm, etc. With a utopia, you don't have this. It can always give you inspiration and shows you a direction, and that's its functionality. So in that sense, today, in this very interesting and strange period of our history, we need utopia more than ever, I suppose. So I don't know if you want to ask more specific questions related to some points of what I said.
Yes, maybe I would ask, do you think if like people come to this idea of utopia in a natural way, or it's a matter of education?
No, it's not something you can give with education. Of course, it is an accumulation of many things, certainly. So a single person cannot sit down and design from scratch a utopia. Even if one thinks so, it is always an accumulation of many influences from all sides, and particularly from the history, the culture, the context, It's their approval and their rejection likewise, but it's always, I mean, the emergence of utopia in the mind of even a single person, or it doesn't happen like this mostly, of course, it is at least a group of people, and you cannot draw the borders of this group. It's something active, like something whirl in the water. So it's an emergent whirl of ideas, emotions, and guidelines that pop up. And eventually, when it's sufficiently mature, at some stage it creates also its own narrative. But the narrative is not the essential. The narrative comes after, just to create a framework where these principles and values can be put together and conveyed also to others.
And have you experienced in your life moments when you felt you were close to Utopia, and was it connected like with a special group of people or a special theme you were working on?
I have to first understand the question correctly. What do you mean by feeling close to a utopia? That I'm really making this utopia real, or in what sense? Do you ask that?
I think in a sense of maybe state of the mind.
That I'm close to that utopia.
Yes.
So I'm functioning in a way that I can proceed towards this utopia.
Yes, it's like it's not as far as it's most of the time it's felt.
I would say that may sound a bit too bold a claim, but I always live like this. I mean, I really wouldn't like to live a moment where I don't feel on the way towards a utopia.
And I would consider one example. I just thought of it because I also think like of is it possible that like certain atmosphere in certain institutions which are connected to the education and like where people are dedicated to knowledge and to the search of knowledge, and the utopia appears, and there is an image in Hermann Hesse novel called in English it's Glasbit play, I think.
Glasperlenspiel.
Yes, in German. Yes. So do you think he was like drawing in utopia and showing its possible trajectory, like?
Now I'm not remembering it so well enough to refer to Glasperlenspiel, so I would prefer to talk about what I sometimes feel. So feeling closer to utopia or somewhat distant from it. I would put it this way. Sometimes you really feel or almost have a clear vision of how you could go there more directly towards this utopia, so how these principles are really viable. Sometimes, you know, it's a long path, so you don't try to envisage this shortcut, and sometimes it seems, oh, it really works. Personally, I sometimes experience this, but I prefer not to be misled by this illusion, because what you can perceive, it's such a complex thing and it's an evolving thing. So in that sense, you cannot possibly imagine what your utopia will look like when you ever get there. So I really prefer to keep this ambiguity as long as possible. And in that sense, sometimes it gives you really courage and also comfort that you feel you're close to it. I mean, certain things are really working. This can also be an illusion sometimes, which kind of lead you even to make compromises for the sake of the realization and give up the essence of what is there. So it is a comfort, these such moments, but I don't take them too seriously.
So there's a sense, like an important sense of Utopia as an aura or as an environment, not as a direct goal.
Yeah, I understand. Sometimes it happens, just like I don't know the English word for it. Échantillon. These little samples. For example, if you are going to buy an essence at the shop, you can buy the large and expensive bottle, but usually they give you also a little sample such that you have an idea. I suppose that there is this fluctuation that people create dualisms for the sake of analysis, categorization, and creating narratives using these separated notions, but that also creates its own limits. And then at some stage they have to give up these distinct things and go back to the original. So in this sense, I wouldn't even say that you reconnect the separated things. You discover or remember that you have separated them yourselves. And that this distinction is not the property of the being itself. It's in our categorization. So times come and go. I consider the whole history as a sequence of such oscillations. So you analyze, create dualisms, distinct ideas, dichotomies, and then you carry out the analysis and the narratives that can be constructed with these concepts as far as they go. And then you start hitting the limits, and at some point they become unsustainable, are dissolved, and then you are in a state of creative chaos. I mean, chaos which you can use creatively. So in that sense, coming back to the dichotomy of nature and culture, I suppose the economical, political, social conditions that rendered this dichotomy possible are collapsing. And I celebrate it.
And do you feel like what Vernadsky, Russian scientist, once called noosphere, like to create a name for the like there is different layers of atmosphere, which is natural.
I know.
Yeah, there is. It has regained such a force that it's already like it's so thick.
Are you talking about the noosphere?
Noosphere,
right now?
yeah. This like and humanity is so in a way unconscious about what's continue to do, and this noosphere is always growing. Like if there is kind of if there would be kind of a turn when it like it would be restricted by the natural forces.
This is one way of looking at it. At a global scale, at a social scale, even before coming to that scale, at a, I wouldn't say micro, but usually for personal level, people use meso scale of an individual. There is the counterpart of this nature-culture dualism, body-mind dualism kind of thing. And this is, of course, a separation that is not sustainable. That's what we are experiencing. So the problem is really, not the problem, the task is to keep the embodied being in such a way that, and allow it to give birth to higher and more abstract levels, which is also what makes up the noosphere after all, such that the dichotomy never emerges, because once you have the split, it's gone. You actually lose the connection, lose the motivation, lose everything, because it doesn't make sense to have a nous without its embodiment. And moreover, it is all the constraints of embodiment that also gives a direction to the mind, because theoretically you could have an infinity of possible paths and directions, but not all of them are viable. And just as a pure mind, you would have to go through an infinite sequence of trials and errors. But if you are grounded, if you are embodied, if you take already the physical reference, the biological reference, etc., for granted, and not lose contact and compatibility with that, then you narrow down your focus, and you still can make trials and errors, but within a range which are all compatible with the grounds of the being, and therefore more viable. So that's what individuals have to do, I suppose. And if sufficiently many people do it, that would also give rise to a noosphere that is not separable from the biosphere or ethnosphere, like Gumilyov would say. That ethnosphere is actually, the way Gumilyov formulates, is much more grounded in biosphere. So all of them are actually a continuum, not separated. What we are experiencing today is, you stated it, I mean, noosphere gaining too much dominance. This is actually because of the split. If you don't have the split, there is this mutual negotiation between more physical, grounded levels of being, which are also more crisp and restrictive, and the more abstract and flexible levels. But there must be a mutual interaction and negotiation such that this edifice is maintains its unity, otherwise it collapses.
And also the aesthetical experience is kind of probably has such a value, like it is still much less I mean, affecting this noosphere kind of thing, because the technologies and production of material things has regained kind of very big acceleration also. And what do you think of this kind of like does aesthetical experience like balance this, like the people who dedicate themselves to art and to this aesthetical experience, what's their how do you see their role in this, the unifying the
Okay.
Asian culture?
There is this thing that our mental experiences, I mean, our abstract part is really very flexible. And this makes it also prone to all kinds of indoctrination, being convinced by other people, or being drawn into a collective experience away, possibly, from the bodily experience and towards a collective abstract experience, which I don't think is sustainable in the long while, but instantaneously for a short while it is really appealing, and if everybody feels the same, one has, I mean, the question emerges, what's the difference? I mean, that's, after all, what makes it real. That's not sustainable if you're detached from the embodiment, your own body, and also the physical, biological being, the whole planet, and the rest of the universe, if you wish. So why am I coining this thing? Because this joint feeling you can share with others can easily be mistaken for an aesthetic experience, can be confused with that. As a matter of fact, I mean, in the background of this whole thing, so far unmentioned, stays, of course, Gilbert Simondon, for me. I mean, not that I have founded all my ideas on his thought, but having discovered him has made it a lot easier for me to express things in a set of terminology someone else has prepared, because I mean, if you also have to invert your own terminology, you are drifting towards a solipsistic, distant outer space. Well, I mean, after all, Simondon is quite himself in an outer space, but nowadays being rediscovered and appreciated. So
actually, I have like a friend who's Indian. He's from India, and he lived for I think he worked as a programmist in US, and then he came to Russia and started to be involved with Russian culture, and he but he also involved in different kind of cultures, and he was the one who told me about Simondon, that it's like the most interesting philosopher he ever knew.
Definitely.
So that's interesting. That
Hocam, since the magazine focuses on utopia and dystopia, and it focuses on a very general lookout, maybe the ideas that are taking us to the system founder mentality, it kind of can be seen also as like a reverse utopia, in which like before that.
Hold on, what is the reverse utopia?
Like the state between the bifurcation that you mentioned, where the separations had not yet been made, can be seen as a reverse utopia.
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't
But
say so.
I think they're like tangential to the theme. Maybe they could also be like mentioned.
I mean, when you say, coin a term like reverse utopia, I have actually no idea so far what you exactly mean by that?
I mean, from our standpoint now, where everything is like separated, and this is creating lots of problems. A situation where it was not separated can be seen
As a little, of course, as a matter of fact, you know, that can be very well connected with. Would you like to record it?
Yeah.
You are already recording
Yeah.
it, okay. From Gumilyov, where he mentions 4 types of people. You know that? You know how he categorizes the people, I mean the types of people according to how they perceive time.
Yeah, I think.
He says they appear at different phases of ethnogenesis. So the first type, he says, the one that dominates the society, the ethnos, at the stage of foundation. Actually, those people to whom the foundation of the ethnos is indebted are the ones who perceive time as something that is the extension of the past, but continues living, so past continuous. The past continues to live, to be present in their own presence. And there are very courageous, energetic, highly motivated, selfless people, etc., trying to add one more thing to the works of their elders. So when they are in domination in a ethnos, in a society, an ethnos can be formed, he says. And there comes the second type, that is equally energetic, takes initiative, etc., but they are not selfless. Actually, they consider the past as lost. And the future is unknown. It's only the present time that counts. And what counts in the present time is their own presence. So they are not selfless. And he says, I really love this part because not only this part, I mean how he analyzes the whole thing in terms of these types of people, in terms of their time perception, because it really rings a bell in me. I can associate them with some examples, very concrete examples from a history that I have experienced personally. So the second type, he says, dominates the society at the so-called at its so-called flourishing time. As a matter of fact, he says, it's called this way, but it is the era where the values that have been accumulated, everything that has been constructed at the time of the first type, are used and consumed, and this consumption creates this appearance of wealth and flourishing, but it's actually the loss, irreversible loss of these values. So this is the type that perceives time as present time. Then he mentions the third type. The third type is, he starts by giving an example of the third type, like Cathars and Bogomirs, etc., or assassins. So he says, you might think, hearing these examples, that this is an exceptional type. I mean, not an ordinary one like the other types. No, they are actually as ordinary as the others. But he says, these are so destructive. First, let's describe how they perceive time. For them, the past is lost. The present is bad. only the future counts, only the dream is true. These are the futurists. And he says they sound, I mean, the examples sound so like exceptional cases and not generically valid because exactly they are so destructive that when they start to dominate the society, either the ethnos collapses eventually because of their destructive activities, or they themselves are destroyed, or, and this is what I love most, at some stage they declare that the dream has come true and turn themselves into the second type. I love that because we have really seen this, and I'm sure in many countries that has been experienced, in Turkey, like in Russia, and also elsewhere. And then, and he says this type is nevertheless only dangerous and destructive in its pure version. If mixed with other types, it can be very creative and useful, he says. And then he goes to the fourth type. He has, of course, very poetic description of that, which I cannot remember, unfortunately, but he says, when all the other types somewhat disappear or lose their domination in the society, either due to an external threat, an invasion, attack of an enemy, or disaster, or because of the destructive effects of the third type, eventually, when everything else kind of loses domination, a sheer mediocrity emerges from all splits and all corners. These are people who do not perceive time. So these are his four.
So they live only in space?
They live only in status quo. They don't perceive the change, and they don't want to have no intention to desire also a change. They have no memory in that sense. Utopia of the third type, the very destructive type, it can be something like this. If you really insist on realizing it, actualizing it now and here, and forcing it also upon others, and this is very likely to lead to that situation which Gumilyov so nicely describes. That you get to a point where you declare the utopia realized and turn into the second type, the selfish, exploiting, present tense type. So that has, of course, happened very often, but that's actually not the nature of utopia. The utopia should be kept as pointing at a future, at an ideal, which is by definition in the future. The moment you declare it realized, you declare the end of the history, which has been done many times, and this is actually death, what you are declaring.
From that point, I would like to ask you about the myth. Like, is it still? It is also considered to be like the myth is something connected to the past, maybe to the past, which is like there is this transition in many cultures from myth to history. Like when the history emerges, the myth disappears.
Okay, that's also a result of the mentality that sees the present day as very rational and no myths at all, and also considers myth as well. This is the common way it's nowadays being used, myth and reality.
But I would like to connect not myth and reality and myth and history, like.
Okay. So for me, mythology is really the utmost abstract form of narrating a course of events. So very abstractly coded history, I would say. And therefore also very, very much subject to interpretation, of course. It is well possible, of course, I don't claim that it was like this, but it is well possible that at least part of the myths, at the time they were being told, were already, let me put it this way, the stories themselves constitute a code, I would say a digital code in the sense of a text. At the time when they were, well, common in the society, the other part, the interpreter of the text, the social context in which it has to be interpreted, was already well known, well established, such that it was not so ambiguous what they meant. Their symbolism must have been much more clearer then. Only for a later culture that has already distanced itself far enough from this social context and social mentality, it is ambiguous and kind of mystical, or even something close to, how do you call it? I mean, primitive beliefs, etc. So it's a symbolism, and if you don't know its interpretation, how it's meant to be interpreted, then it is for you really something. You can attribute to it a primitive belief system, but I don't think that. At least not all myths, ancient myths, deserve to be categorized like this. So, in that sense, another thing easily escapes attention, namely, we have also lots of myths today in different forms. I mean, more compact an analysis and its narrative is, the closer it is to the form of a myth, actually. When we are in the correct context where this text of the myth has emerged, don't consider it as a myth, because we really know for us it's quite understandable and unique how the symbolism is meant and needs to be interpreted. So therefore I regard mythology as a very subtle clue for interpreting history.
And maybe, like, I would refer to Levi-Strauss' note that history somehow is a part of mythology also, but it kind of occupied what earlier was myth. So it's like a consciously constructed myth which we now consider history?
You know, the difference between myth and history in that sense, I mean, historical narrative
Yeah.
and mythical narrative, is that mythical narrative has this abstract character, the symbolic character, which gives it an inherent ambiguity, which makes it, of course, open to interpretation in that sense. And exactly this makes a myth something beyond true or false. With a correct interpretation, you could always gain meaning out of it and even apply it to different contexts other than where the specific myth itself has originated from. Whereas history, the way it's written, the way it's narrated, tries to be concrete and eliminate ambiguity and tries to avoid the symbolic representation, tries to be factual, and is therefore much more prone to errors. Actually, it's a model, it's a representation, so of course it's supposed to contain, cannot avoid having errors, but since it lacks the inherent ambiguity, it can be false. If it were more symbolic, therefore more flexible, it would not be false. It could leave the room for interpretation and therefore escape from being false or true. In that sense, mythical narratives being above the level where false or true is applicable, evokes the feeling that this is not realistic. This doesn't convey any information about the real world. No, it does convey a deeper analysis, a higher analysis, I would say. So this is the difference, and that's why I find, in some sense, myths more informative than historical documents, because no matter what, historical documents, narratives, the sequence of events, etc., are written down by some people who are unavoidably sided, which is, of course, understandable. But if you want to really gain a perspective about what really happened, and this is already a utopian endeavor, you just have to dig deeper, compare different narratives, find the conflicts, and try to construct yourself the mythical narrative for yourself at the abstract level. And I would really dare to claim that it is a narrative at that high abstract level which only creates a sense of understanding in the human. A sequence of informations doesn't make sense.
Meaning-making faculty.
Yeah. I mean, the feeling, the experience of meaning-making. At that moment, I really captured this level of abstraction, a description at that level of abstraction that really makes sense and gathers previously seemingly conflicting things. That is the experience of understanding.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How would you elaborate on the effects of digitalization on meaning making?
I mean, these are actually two things that are rather at rather distant levels, but of course there is such an effect. The adverse effect of digitalization or meaning making, in my opinion, comes through the change, the gradual change it induces in the society by convincing at least the general public mind that meaning is something that comes as a package together with information, which can be measured in bits and bytes, which is completely objective and quantifiable. So once you have people who have been indoctrinated into this mentality, then of course they have problems in meaning making, because you see, once you accept that information and meaning attached to it are out there as an objective external entity flowing, which you can fill into your glass and drink, etc., you actually have already delegated meaning making. And this is the real danger, because meaning making is a faculty, like all other faculties, that needs to be nourished, trained, kept fit all the time. Once you delegate it and just put yourself into the passive condition of a meaning consumer, then your faculties are getting underdeveloped or are never developed as they could have been.
And would you think that this process and what it has brought to us are paving the way for a society that is dominated by type 4 time series?
I can say these are complicated dynamics. I mean, whatever I would say would be probably wrong, strictly speaking, but still, if I try to make a thought experiment, on one hand, this excitement towards a digital society and transhumanism, etc., the promise is very much of the kind of things that the futurist type, the third type, has promoted now and then in the history. But I don't think that this is a sustainable one. So this trend will probably accelerate the going down of the ethnic cycle. Well, in Gumilyov's sense, ethnic cycle, he doesn't even use this term, but I mean the cycle he is talking about is not attached to a specific ethnos, not as a race or nation. Let's talk about the culture, but I suppose that this trend will just accelerate the process of decline, and which is not so bad. That also evokes the going up of the next cycle, after all.
And the relationship that these have to the contemplation of future in a society of this kind.
I didn't get quite what you are specifically asking.
I'm not actually asking. I'm thinking and throwing out terms to maybe form a relation in your mind. Like,
so once more, give another try.
So I think in the bottom, the technology that is dominantly digital or dominantly analog would create different people because of the different acculturations and different mentalities could end up with different outlooks on the future and perception of time.
Okay, I understand now what you mean. I really would not make such a direct and immediate connection between a specific type of technology and the mentality that emerges in that time. Because the technology, well, for example, digital technologies, if they were not, they did not coincide with the economical system of consumption society, performance pressure and efficiency boosting ideologies, etc. They could have served completely different purposes. So there are other doctrines and ideologies which affect how a certain technology will affect the mentality. So I would not, therefore, try to explain everything in terms of this technology or that technology. After all, in their essence, any technology provides you a set of tools. If you preserve your unity within what I call the edifice of knowing, called this way in one of a recent article. So an edifice that is grounded in embodiment, which provides you with lots of subconscious levels of know-how already, and then continue to the abstract levels, more abstract and abstract knowledge, also connected with the culture, etc. If you as a person really live in the unity of all these levels together, then all these technologies could give you, would be tools.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that cybernetics has this, the word cybernetic has the etymology of like leading a ship.
Yes,
so
Kubernetes.
Yes, so it's like the more complex world becomes, like the more refined tools appear, and they are there to help to navigate. And this is like maybe the good part, good side of the digital.
You know what? I mean, first of all, cybernetics, the control part does not necessarily require digitization. There is analog control too, throughout the whole nature and also in technology. As a matter of fact, the cybernetic trend has been kind of hijacked by digitization and information theory, and as a consequence of that, today one might think control, so digital. No, these are not one and the same thing. But while you were talking, I remembered also something that I have mentioned. I suppose in the first conference talk I made with the purpose of criticizing cybernetics, that must have been sometime 2005 or so. At the end of the PowerPoint presentation, I put that sailing boat and I invited the hypothetical Kubernetes, the steersman, or let me put it this way, I invited the cybernetician to take an example of the actual Kubernetes steersman who tries to do his best to control his ship and the sails, etc., but tries to comply, to know better and comply with the sea and the weather. So it's, I mean, the direction cybernetics and its followers have headed is unfortunately more towards controlling the sea and the wind.
Yeah, so it's like you can have like all the data you can have, but
Yeah.
still it's not sufficient when you need to make a decision to like
No,
which.
and I mean, what the Kubernetes, the steersman, has to have control of is actually his own ship. And coming back to the initial body-mind or nature-culture divide, the trend has led us more towards trying to control the sea and the wind, but neglecting our own embodiment and the connection between them. So
And losing the control of ourselves and our
control of everything. I mean, this is a vicious circle after all. Trying to control all those things that are too big for us to control, even to have the least glimpse, even to have an idea about their level of complexity, attempting to control these and at the same time neglecting the control of those things we are in charge of, leads to a crisis which invites or instigates us to seek more control, and this vicious circle takes us to a collapse.
Kubernetes has to control his hands first.
Hands, yes. Kubernetes has to, I mean, if you imagine a true captain, true salesman, what does he have to, I mean, what is the qualities he has to have first? A very good knowledge of the sea, all the streams, all the rocks,
Astronomy.
the shore, astronomy, the weather, and also readiness to navigate in this uncertainty.
What you said reminded me of my conversations with people who are about to graduate. I have no idea where I'm going and where I will be, and I'm speaking with many people because I'm also about to graduate.
Yeah.
And I think it's about 90% of them. I see this so as the Kubernetes of their existence, perhaps.
I would say, I mean, now that they are about to leave their somewhat secure, if not secure, still well-defined domain of study, and enter the unknown sea, they really realize, they see the true situation, because unfortunately education and all the myths constructed around it create the a false sense of security and determinacy, whereas they now realize, it's not like this. It's a very good situation. It's of course unfortunate that they have been kind of accustomed to this false determinism. I wish they had made a closer and better acquaintance with uncertainty and had learned to live with it before they all of a sudden face it.
They should have just spent some time in the Bosphorus, perhaps.
If I had seen in earlier times in my social context just one example, one different example, I could have chosen a different path. It is, I mean, being convinced of something is not a statistical matter. If you have different options that you can compare, even one example of a good, natural, viable solution is enough to break the illusion created by
you can hold on to something that is real
Yes,
decisions.
I mean, the whole state of mind based on statistical optimization convinces people of an illusion, as if we are really making such statistical inferences independent of the value of the content. I mean, if there is nobody around who is offering you a reasonable solution, and you're a child and grow up in that context, well, okay, you may really think that's the way the world is. But one person who is telling otherwise, a different content, no matter how small a fraction of the whole, can resonate the unity of the whole being in you, and allows you to think autonomously. If you have no way out, okay, then you accept a wrong indoctrination as law of nature.
I see the filtering as like, I started with some people in the university, I saw their transformations, and now I'm like seeing how some of them have realized what life actually is, and like started grasping life, and like being hit by the winds, being hit by the waves, and I see that they're like getting, I don't want to say stronger, but they're getting firmer and more alive, and some of them have like fallen to the winds, or not even like got into that interaction, and they're falling down. It's like some of the leaves and some
Yes,
of the other leaves.
yes. So, as far as this culture-nature divide is concerned, of course, its evidence is quite a long time there is a disharmony. Not even disharmony, because that sounds as if a perfect harmony would be the utmost ideal. No, that's not what I mean. But a perfect conflict is also not an ideal, not a sustainable thing. So the opposite of a conflict is not perfect harmony, but state of operation where negotiations and change are possible. So, in that respect, until several years ago, looking at the whole situation of the world, I was thinking that in this crisis, probably it will be the nature that constitutes the weakest link, where this whole thing will collapse. Well, that will break and cause the whole spiral collapse. But interestingly enough, I keep on observing that human being turns out to be the weakest link, not able to survive without meaning making. And one can survive, well, as long as the biological bottom needs are satisfied under almost all conditions. But without meaning making, they start to commit suicide, really.
And parallel to suicide, I'm going to make a comparison with dying kittens. When a kitten is dying, at first they have heat, they have heartbeat, they have breath, and then slowly the heat dissolves, the heartbeats become fewer, the breath becomes almost imperceptible, and then it fades away and becomes an object. In this situation where people are taken towards people are put in a situation where they can delegate the meaning-making function to an external ready-made packaged things. Some tend to go towards non-sober paths. Some have problems with their mental health, and I think some lose this life. I think that's like if you
Liveliness.
yes, if you have liveliness, you can outgrow things. You can get through diseases and mental problems and problems that life brings. But I think
Generate solutions.
yes, that's like there is some inner life energy that is lost, and
Yes.
then
You know what? Sorry for interrupting you. Just while you were talking, it occurred to me how these ready-made packages, which demand your autonomy of meaning making, are promoted as freedom under the label of freedom and liberties.
yes.
Taking away your autonomy, this is really an awful situation, and without this autonomy of meaning making, really it's
And it is comfortable at the beginning to delegate it, but after some time you lose the ability to revive it and take it back.
yes. As a matter of fact, of course I have the opportunity to see many examples in my students. How these packages, when they are being promoted, make use of the same mechanism against which these young people are rebelling, actually. Some other instance, authority, parents, family, school, university, whatever, the state, when they demand your autonomy, try to take it away, they rebel, and then they readily deliver it to some other instance and start trying to gain the favors of some other instance that appears them most of the time in the shape of a collective group.
And the social institutions that we have now that are related to the mental health of the society could also be seen to be the propagators of the mental health problems in the first place. Now in my psychology courses I see that they're speaking about the same problems that we are speaking about, and they're completely aware of the situation, and also with their quantitative analysis the size is apparent. I think about 30% of all college students worldwide have anxiety problems at the moment, and the solutions that they offer to these problems seem to me to propagate them further. It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. I mean, it is the mentality, the general mental system created in that atmosphere that creates the disease. So it cannot solve the conflict.
And in a very updated teacher's lecture, I heard that now there are suggestions to change the language and to not use mental health but well-being instead of mental health, and instead of psychotherapy, group meetings. So as to just remove those terminology completely.
Yes. The negative associations removed, such that you cannot even know and express what is wrong with you.
Yes.
You cannot say I feel sick and tired, but you can just say my feeling of well-being is low today, or something like this, sweeping the problem under the carpet.
It's like the dystopian languages that are.
Yes. It's anyway this behaviorist approach that created the problem, because, okay, if there is a vicious circle between an interaction between the behavior and the internal problem, and if you do not have access to the interior but have a chance to interact and possibly modify the behavior, then this can be used as a way of breaking this vicious circle. This I accept, but the trend has not stopped at that point. It came so far as to claim that it's all about the behavior. There is nothing inside anyway. Or it can be a superstition. Maybe there is no inside at all. It's irrelevant as far as you can produce the correct behavior, desirable behavior.
And perhaps we have a similar dynamic to the language change that I mentioned, in that because the behaviorist mentality is all over the place without it's being mentioned as much as it used to be. And we might see a similar trend in how they use, how they will stop using psychotherapy and will say well-being.
This can
practices.
make the problems even worse. I remember, who was that? Austrian friend mentioned the following situation. His brother, I suppose, he was working somewhere in in Southeast Asia. I don't remember right now. It was an island, I suppose, a former British colony. So they were speaking English. They had official language, everything in English, but so that young generations had already forgotten their native language. But the way they spoke English was also quite Tarzan English. I mean, and at some stage, the administration noticed a serious problem, a depression, a widespread depression in the society. And they investigated, etc. At the end, what they discovered as a source was the fact that young generations did not have the linguistic facilities to express their feelings.
And like not the solution, but what I see with people that are isolated in their own mental world is that sincere interaction can like slowly and slowly melt those layers that have become rigid. And like it's actually I don't want to use the word solution for this, but like I'm gonna say
conflict resolution or something like this.
Resolution is like just here, like in this interaction.
Yeah.
But at this, they are thinking about state policies with billions of dollars budgets to solve these situations.
Those who have caused the problem cannot possibly solve it.
And they are propagating even further.
You know what? On the other hand, in some sense we are in a lucky era. In what sense? The solution you are talking about is so near. I mean, just touch, and all of a sudden, I mean, you open your house and people come and you organize a few hours event, and already you feel the effect, because it's so rare, it's so seldom the natural touch. It can create a huge difference. So in that sense, now more than ever, it is possible to induce change which can propagate by itself like a snowball. Not because it's huge and coming from all sides and invested.
Human to human connections.
Not because it is sponsored by companies and what money pours in and the media shows this, etc. No, because it can resonate, because it's compatible in that sense with the nature of the matter, of living, and
of humans.
the human
Like,
spirit.
because when you put them together, we have the tendency to, if you break those walls. But I think the ability to induce sincerity is also like an ability that is at stake at the moment. And like if I
Not
observe,
everyone can do it. You have to have it
Mhm.
to induce it.
Yes.
But a small amount
If
suffices.
somebody else comes and like drops it and then leaves, it
Mhm.
still lingers on in that area.
Yeah.
And then they can form bonds in which they can interact with each other without thinking about the larger schemes of isolated mental models that they have, and they wouldn't be arranging their behavior accordingly, because isolation is a very big component of the situation that
Yes,
we are
of course.
speaking about, and
Of course.
this starts from when we are born, because in an extended family you would have the mental representations of the world of 5, 6, 7, 8
Sure.
people who
Yes.
all have different personalities, and they would all take part in your
Yes.
uh,
And you have the prerogative of choosing
mhm.
between them,
Yes.
comparing them, not wholesale, this from that one, this from the other one, and make your own composition, object to this part of this person,
Mhm.
accept that part, etc. So that creates a huge degree of freedom. And one more thing, as a matter of fact, the situation, the present situation would be really dark and hopeless if, let's say, the information paradigm, the reductionistic understanding of information and mind as an information processor were true. But it's not,
And it's
because
showing
what they would call information, which is actually the change you instigate by having this natural touch.
Mhm.
This is not information taken in, processed, and put out. No, it is transforming. The hope is in this transformation. It's not only transforming the person receiving this touch, but it's also transforming you. So it's propagating like a wave,
Mhm.
and at the same time, it also avoids this dangerous and arrogant position of giving direction to the others, showing the way, being the leader. No, we are all interacting. Your roads intersect somewhere.
Mhm.
You instigate a change, and you change yourself, and then who knows how the whole thing will evolve. But this whole thing really gives hope, and also provides you a ground for investing in the human potential and having faith in it.
And this investment is not an investment that the policymakers are
No,
thinking about.
no.
And our isolation starts from day one, because I only have one parent and like one mother and one father. I didn't grow up with my grandparents, so one has one worldview, the other has two worldviews, and I see in my existence, until very recently at least, that it's just two representations clashing with each other, or like being in harmony, but not more than that. And you have to expand it by yourself after an age in which you lost much of the plasticity.
Yeah. Well, still.
But still, I'm really, I was much more pessimistic about these situations before, but after seeing the potential in a human to re-grab life,
Yeah.
and to break those boundaries that are created by isolation.
The isolation, this is good that you mention it, because it allows me to hint at an interesting aspect of this thing. the hope in breaking the isolation is not sideways contacting the others, but grounding yourself, because once you re-establish your connection to the embodied part of being, at that level you are anyway connected with everything, actually. And once you discover this connection, then this already generates also the possibility of breaking the isolation at more social and abstract levels.
And this is, instead of a linear process, is more like a dance in which
It's a dance.
you connect and it melts and it comes from some other side.
Yes, and it's a lot of circular causality. And that's why it also does not lend itself enough to the modeling methods of policymakers, for example. They want to have sequential causality such that they can apply their policies and then measure the results and upload themselves, etc.
A huge waste of tax. All of it. Yeah. And I'm like very glad, and they're like inviting me.
Yes, that's
Is this-
bu yolunu bulur.
Yes. And once you see how easy it actually is,
Yes.
then they do it.
It's transduction, what Simon calls transduction. It's this procedure of crystallization, actually. If you provide a seed that is compatible with the potential, then you don't have to run behind it and follow the whole path and direct them as a shepherd. No.
It will flourish in its own way in each particular place.
And find also the correct context-specific manifestation.
And that's good. It's like species of the same plant. One is on the northern side of the mountain. One is on the southern side of the mountain, and each are different. And that's like where the
that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, the dance and music are there.
And also there is a dynamic, like we had this like digital decades, and we had this pandemic, I think, when people were more isolated, and then somehow it gets us back to this kind of interaction and transaction, which now feel much more essential. Like
Yes, I mean now that we have missed it for so long, we are ready to appreciate. I mean, when our retarded dictator announced that the education, the universities will be online and closed
Do
until
you know
summer.
that situation?
no.
No, due to the earthquake, somewhere he was talking, and all of a sudden, through his mouth came this silly utterance, and the whole institution for higher education, and the rectors, etc., all those people who are, I hope you're not recording this thing, try to just follow his lead and make his utterance come true.
To make all of the universities online.
Yeah, that's
That
great.
was I mean, all
Yeah.
my students, including Begum, etc., started calling me and sending me, not only me, of course, all professors, messages. Is it true? Are we really not going to come, etc.? I mean, that was for the first time. We saw so many students just burning to come to the class.
Yes, yes, it's a great way to
Yes.
get students interested.
Yes.
Come.